For years, I thought I'd seen every piece of Bigfoot footage out there. The grainy clips, the shaky phone videos, the stuff that's easy to laugh off. But the sightings in this video are nothing like that. Join me as we reveal the most terrifying Bigfoot sightings ever recorded. I'm Trevor, and welcome everyone to Bigfoot Encounters. Marie Christina Marquez, Tina to the people who knew her, is moving briskly along a trail that cuts through second-growth Douglas fir, somewhere in the foothills east of the Cascades. She has a day pack on her back, trekking poles in her hands, and the look of someone who has been out longer than she planned and wants to get home before dark. The trail cam catches her at a slight angle from above, mounted maybe 8 feet up on a cedar post, and in that first frame she looks completely ordinary. A woman on a hike, doing what hikers do, watching the trail ahead. But she isn't watching the trail ahead. She's watching what's behind her. And in those first few seconds of footage, that detail is everything. She turns twice in the span of maybe 30 seconds, not the casual glance of someone who heard a bird or a branch snap. The kind of look where she pivots her whole body, stops moving, and stares back down the trail for a solid 2 or 3 seconds each time. Bigfoot has already gotten her attention. Bigfoot has already reached into her nervous system and pulled a wire loose. And then the camera catches what she can't see yet. At the far left edge of the frame, barely visible in the tree line where the light is already failing, there is a shape that doesn't belong. Bigfoot is standing still among the firs, set back maybe 40 feet from the trail edge, and it is tall. Tall in a way that no black bear stands, tall in a way that no human being stands, tall in the particular way of something that has mass and height and presence all working together into a silhouette that makes the rational part of your brain throw its hands up and go quiet. Right from the first frame, something is off. The trail cams out in that area weren't installed to capture anything like this. They were monitoring deer movement patterns for a state wildlife survey. Whatever found Tina that evening was not supposed to be there. And yet here, Bigfoot is. She moves through the next section of trail at a pace that's climbing toward a jog without quite getting there. That particular human gear where your legs want to run, but your pride or your fear won't let them. The gear where you're trying to look composed while everything inside you is screaming. Could she keep this facade long enough to survive? The trail cam picks her up again about 60 yards further on. A second unit mounted near a creek crossing, and in this footage, the environmental context has shifted noticeably. The trees along this stretch have been worked over, not by wind, not by any weather event. Several of the smaller pines flanking the trail have had their lower bark stripped in long vertical patches, the exposed wood pale and raw against the dark forest floor, fresh enough that the cambium is still wet-looking in the footage. There are branches on the ground that didn't fall. Bigfoot snapped them cleanly from heights of 7 or 8 feet, the break points splintered in the way you get when something applies sudden downward force rather than the ragged tearing of weather damage. And in the mud along the creek bank, partially captured at the bottom of the frame, there are depressions in the ground that are unmistakably Bigfoot's footprints. The shape is humanoid. The size is not. Each impression is roughly 18 inches long and maybe 8 inches across at the ball of the foot, the toe marks pressed deep and individually distinct. Whatever made those tracks was heavy enough that it sank 2 inches into ground that Tina's own boots are barely marking. In the trail cam footage, I could see her notice the footprints. You can tell because she stops at the creek crossing for a moment, her poles going still, and she looks down at the bank with the frozen posture of someone whose brain is processing something that their worldview doesn't have a category for yet. She stands there for maybe 4 seconds. Then she steps across the creek and keeps moving, faster now, and she pulls something from her jacket pocket, her phone. She holds it out ahead of her at chest height, not quite filming, not quite calling, just holding it like a tether to something familiar, something that exists in the same world as cell towers and pizza delivery and people who would answer if she called. Will the comfort of technology be enough to keep her grounded? Her phone was recording audio the entire time. That detail matters more than almost anything else in this case, because what the audio captured in the stretch after the creek crossing is something that the trail cam footage alone can't fully communicate. The trail cams give you the visual, the shape of what happened, the geography of it, the terrible spatial logic. But the audio gives you the texture, the atmosphere. It gives you what Tina was actually inside of. The sounds start low. They're easy to miss under the ambient noise of the creek fading behind her and her own footfalls on the trail. But they're there, a subsonic pressure more than a sound, the kind of frequency that a human chest cavity registers as unease before the ears process it as a noise at all. Then it sharpens into something identifiable. Bigfoot's rhythmic guttural vocalization coming from the tree line to her left, low and deliberate, with a cadence that is nothing like any wildlife call that has a clean scientific explanation. It repeats. Not randomly, it repeats with the consistency of something communicating, spacing each utterance with what sounds like intentional pause, like punctuation. And then, from further away and to her right, a different voice answers it. Lower in register, longer in duration, with a resonant quality that the phone's microphone clearly struggles with, clipping at the peaks of each exhalation. Two distinct vocalizations, two distinct sources. She is between them. Notice how precise the movement is on the footage at this point. The trail cam northeast of the creek crossing, the third unit in the sequence, shows Bigfoot emerging from the tree line behind her. Not charging, not thrashing through the brush, but moving with a measured, quiet deliberateness along the edge of the trail, maybe 30 feet back and closing slowly. The creature's gait is long and unhurried. It isn't chasing her, it's pacing her. There's a difference, and the footage makes that difference absolutely clear. Bigfoot isn't trying to catch Tina. Bigfoot is steering her. She tries to fight the noise. That's what you have to understand about what comes next. Tina isn't passive in this footage. She's not frozen or hysterical. She picks up a fallen branch from the trail edge, something maybe 3 feet long and wrist thick, and she starts banging it against the trunk of a tree as she walks. A rhythmic, sharp crack, over and over, the sound carrying through the trees in all directions. The audio on her phone makes this thunderous and immediate, each impact clean and hard. It's a reasonable instinct. Noise deters most wildlife, disrupts their comfort zone, gives you the psychological initiative. For a bear or a cougar, it probably works most of the time. But what if this instinct backfires entirely? For Bigfoot, it accomplishes the opposite. The trail cam footage is unambiguous on this point. The moment Tina starts banging the branch, the creature behind her closes the distance by roughly 10 feet in the span of a few seconds. Not running, not startled into aggression, just adjusting its pace the way you would if someone ahead of you on a street suddenly slowed down. The vocalizations from the audio respond to the answering call from her right flank becoming more frequent, the intervals between utterances shortening. She's ringing a dinner bell. She's marking her location with a precision that renders her impossible to lose. And when she bangs again, louder this time, putting real force into it. The footage shows Bigfoot stepping fully onto the trail behind her, into the open, no longer bothering with the tree line. Every warning she tries to make, yelling, banging, seems to draw them closer. You can almost feel the panic shifting in her, the animal part of her brain beginning to override the rational response. Because what do you do when every instinct you have turns out to be exactly wrong? She finds the rock outcrop at 6:11 p.m., according to the trail cam timestamp. It rises off the right side of the trail like a small natural fortress, maybe 12 feet of tilted granite ledge with enough handholds to climb and enough elevation to give her a vantage point, a defensible position. You can see her calculating it. She hesitates for only a second at the base, then she commits, jamming her trekking poles through the straps of her daypack to free her hands and going at the rock face with a speed and efficiency that speaks to experience. Someone who has climbed before, someone who knows what her body can do. She gets 7 or 8 feet up in about 10 seconds, and for a brief moment, maybe 3 seconds, she's above it all. Her head swings around, scanning the forest floor, breathing hard but moving well. Bigfoot reaches the base of the outcrop before she makes it to the top. The footage here is the most physically confrontational sequence in the entire recording, and it is difficult to watch with any detachment whatsoever. The creature, moving with a speed that is startling relative to everything that's come before, a sudden gear change from that measured pace into something decisive and fast, closes the distance to the rock face and reaches up to close a hand around her left ankle. The grip is enough to arrest her upward movement completely, dead stopping a woman who was moving with momentum. and then she is pulled downward, not with wild violence, but with an irresistible steady force, back toward the ground. She swings the trekking pole she managed to pull from her pack, and it connects. The footage shows the pole whipping through a thick mass of dark hair, and the audio carries the impact. But Bigfoot doesn't release her, doesn't flinch in any meaningful way. She lands hard at the base of the outcrop, stumbles, gets her feet back under her, and that's when she sees the second one. And there it is, 2 of them. The footage makes this crystal clear, coordinated, intelligent behavior, executed with a fluency that implies not just instinct, but planning. They aren't animals that happen to converge on the same location. The positioning is tactical. How do you react when the danger doubles in an instant? The second Bigfoot is above her. It had apparently moved to the high end of the outcrop while the first was below, and it stands at the top of the granite ledge now, blocking any upward route with a mass and presence that makes the rock face suddenly meaningless as an escape option. 7 feet tall at minimum, maybe more. The trail cam angle makes precise estimation difficult, but the scale against the surrounding trees is unmistakable. The creature stands without urgency, without the aggressive display you'd expect from a territorial animal, without anything that looks like fear or excitement. It just stands there, occupying the high ground, and watches her. The effect on Tina is immediate and total. She backs away from the outcrop, and in backing away, she moves exactly where the terrain wants her to go, back onto the main trail. And then, because Bigfoot on the trail behind her has resumed that slow, measured approach, she turns onto the narrower branch trail that cuts to the left. She takes it fast, breaking into an actual run now, trekking poles swinging, and the audio fills with the sound of her breathing, raw and ragged, the kind of breathing that comes when the body has committed everything to movement. The narrow trail curves to the left in a long arc. It is, though she doesn't know this yet, a loop trail, a natural cul-de-sac that curves back on itself in a roughly half-mile arc and deposits you exactly where you entered it. There is no exit at the far end. It is, in the most brutal possible sense, a trap. And whether or not Bigfoot knew that, whether or not the intelligence at work here included a spatial understanding of that trail system, the 2 creatures are now positioned precisely to take advantage of it. Could she realize the trap before it closes completely around her? The loop trail has 3 trail cams on it, originally placed to monitor elk movement through the corridor, and what they collectively capture over the next 11 minutes is the most complete and most harrowing sequence in the entire footage record. Tina moves through the corridor at a pace that oscillates between full run and stumbling jog, catching herself on roots and rocks, losing a trekking pole somewhere in the first quarter mile, her day pack shifted half off one shoulder. The loop itself is roughly half a mile end to end, curving in a tight arc through old-growth fir and hemlock, the trail surface uneven, with decades of root growth heaving the dirt into ridges and hollows that are manageable at a walking pace and treacherous at a run. The forest in here is denser than the main trail, the canopy lower, the light almost entirely gone now. The trail cams have switched to infrared, rendering everything in flat silver-white gradients that give the footage an additional layer of unreality, like something recorded in a different dimension entirely. Bigfoot moves through it on both sides, not on the trail, parallel to it, maybe 20 feet into the trees on each flank, visible on the trail cam footage as large, heat-radiating shapes moving steadily through the underbrush with a silence that seems impossible given their mass. The audio catches the occasional shift of weight on the forest floor, the sound of something large displacing brush, but no crashing, no snapping of branches, no noise that would give away position or distance. They are quieter than she is. They are faster than she is moving. And they are on both sides, maintaining spacing, neither closing nor falling back, simply keeping pace and containing the corridor. It's terrifying, she's moving faster, but the loop doesn't give her a way out. The camera angles capture this like a predator's choreography, every position deliberate, every interval maintained. What you're watching is a system working exactly as intended. Can she outthink a plan that seems smarter than a human mind? She realizes the trail is looping back at the 6:19 p.m. mark. You can tell because she slows suddenly, and the way she slows is different from exhaustion. It's the slowing of comprehension, of a terrible realization landing. She would have recognized the terrain, a particular bent cedar or a rock formation she'd passed 8 minutes earlier, and understood in that moment what the geography meant. The audio goes quiet except for her breathing, which has dropped from the frantic rhythm of full exertion to something more controlled, more careful, and somehow more frightening for it. She stops completely, stands in the middle of the trail, looks left and looks right, looks back the way she came. The shapes in the tree line on both sides have also stopped, those enormous heat signatures going still in the infrared, patient and absolute. The audio picks up the vocalization again, the low guttural call, and this time it comes from very close, maybe 15 feet into the trees to her left, close enough that the phone's microphone captures a texture to it, a chest resonance, a warmth of proximity. She turns toward it. Bigfoot steps partially into the trail corridor from the right flank, visible at the edge of infrared range, and she pivots to face that instead. The first Bigfoot materializes at the back of the corridor behind her, the entry point of the loop, blocking the only route back to the main trail. The second moves in from the right, closing the gap between its previous position and the trail edge with the same calm deliberateness that has characterized every movement throughout this footage. She is in the center of a triangle that is contracting steadily, with no seam she can find and no gap she can force open. She starts moving again, forward, toward the loop exit back to the main trail, the only geometry that makes any sense. And she is moving fast, but the roots in this section of trail are thick and interlocking, and the infrared footage turns the ground into a high-contrast maze of light and shadow that conceals depth. She trips. Not a stumble she catches herself from. A full, committed fall, both hands hitting the ground, her chin narrowly missing a root, her daypack swinging forward over her head and dumping onto the trail in front of her. The audio records the impact, and then a sound from her that is not a scream exactly, more like the involuntary expulsion of air that comes when fear becomes physical, when the body finally accepts what the mind has been trying to process. She gets one hand under herself, starts to push up, and Bigfoot is already there. The first creature reaches her in 2 strides from somewhere. The camera barely captured it approaching. The speed is shocking after so much patience. The same gear change that happened at the rock outcrop, from stillness to decisive motion without any intermediate step. One large hand comes down on her upper back with a pressure that pins her to the trail without the force of a strike. The kind of controlled application of weight that is more frightening than violence would be, because it is precise. She struggles, twisting at the waist, swinging her remaining trekking pole one-handed, and the audio carries her voice now. Words, not just sounds. Words directed at the creature above her, the specific words indistinct under the ambient noise, but the cadence of them clear. A sustained attempt to communicate, to reach something in the intelligence she had clearly, by this point, accepted was there. Could communication work when survival depends on submission? The second Bigfoot approaches from the front. It moves to the daypack that has spilled onto the trail ahead of her, and it does something that stops the breath in anyone who has ever watched this footage for the first time. It reaches into the pack, not randomly, not with the chaotic investigation of an animal going through human belongings for food. It searches with a purpose. It moves aside the water bottle, the first aid kit, the rain shell, and it finds, or more accurately, retrieves, as if it knew exactly what it was looking for, the length of the paracord that Tina had stored in a side pocket of the pack, standard hiking gear, 30 feet of braided nylon cord, the kind of thing any experienced hiker carries. Bigfoot draws it out, examines it for barely a second, and moves toward her. You can see the intelligence here, using the rope. They're handling her like they've done this before, or at the very least, like they understand the concept of restraint. That's the part that I can't stop thinking about. Not the strength, not the size, the understanding. The binding takes less time than you would expect. The second Bigfoot works at her wrists first, while the first maintains the pressure on her back, and though she struggles, the audio is full of the sounds of it, the friction of cord on ground, the impact of her feet against the trail as she tries to push herself forward. The outcome is not in doubt from the moment it begins. Her wrists are secured behind her, then her ankles. She is moved, carefully without roughness, with a handling that is almost methodical in its gentleness relative to the force that preceded it, to the base of a large Douglas fir at the edge of the trail. The final trail cam in the loop sequence catches this in full infrared. Tina sitting with her back against the tree, her bound wrists behind her, her legs extended and bound at the ankle. Both Bigfoot creatures are standing over her, still, looking down. She is still talking. The audio catches it, her voice steady now in a way that sounds less like calm and more like the particular mental state you reach when panic has run its full course and the body simply doesn't have the resources to maintain it anymore. The words are still mostly indistinct, but the delivery is measured, deliberate, the cadence of someone who has decided that communication is the only remaining option and is committing to it completely. One of the creatures responds. The audio captures it clearly. The low vocalization, close, directed downward toward where she is sitting, different in character from the territorial calls that punctuated the earlier footage. Less loud, but more considered. She responds to it. It responds to her. This exchange, if that's what it is, and I believe that's what it is, lasts for approximately 40 seconds. Is dialogue enough when danger towers over you? The trail cam cuts out at 6:31 p.m. Not a slow fade, not a low battery shutdown sequence. An abrupt, instantaneous end to the recording, as if the power supply was physically interrupted. The footage simply stops. One frame there is the infrared image. The tree, Tina tied against it, the two massive shapes of Bigfoot standing over her in the flat silver light. The next frame is nothing. The camera never recorded again. Her phone was found 6 days later in her abandoned day pack, recovered from the loop trail by a search and rescue team working the area after she was reported missing. Tina Marquez was never found. In November 2020, veteran hunter Thaddius Ravenclaw was tracking elk in the remote Blackmore Mountains when he witnessed something that revealed the horrifying truth about decades of missing hunters in the region. On his third day hunting, approximately 8 miles from base camp, Thaddius noticed the forest had become unnaturally quiet. Against his better judgment, Thaddius investigated, positioning himself behind a fallen log on a ridge overlooking a small valley. Through his rifle scope, Thaddius saw another hunter moving through the forest below. Everything appeared normal, but Thaddius could see what the hunter couldn't. Something massive stalking him from the tree line. The creature moved with fluid grace between the shadows, standing at least 11 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they filled spaces between trees. It demonstrated predatory precision that spoke to years of experience hunting human prey, matching the hunter's pace exactly, studying patterns, waiting for the optimal moment to strike. The stalking was methodical and calculated. The creature matched the hunter's pace exactly, maintaining consistent distance. When the hunter paused, it paused. When he changed direction, it adjusted accordingly. This wasn't animal behavior. This was calculated predation by an intelligence that understood human psychology and behavior patterns with terrifying sophistication. The creature studied its prey with the patience of a master predator, learning patterns and waiting for the optimal moment to strike. It moved ahead of the hunter, positioning itself to observe from multiple angles. It wasn't just following, it was herding, subtly influencing the hunter's path toward some predetermined kill zone where the attack would be most effective. Most disturbing was the creature's obvious tactical intelligence. It considered wind direction, terrain advantages, escape routes, and optimal attack positions with military-level strategic planning. This suggested extensive practice on human subjects, refining its methods through systematic predation conducted over many years of hunting human beings in these remote mountains. The creature's size alone was terrifying. Through his scope, Thaddius could see that it stood at least 11 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to fill the spaces between trees. Its arms were disproportionately long, hanging down past its knees and ending in hands that appeared capable of crushing human bones like twigs. The creature's entire physiology seemed designed for violence, every aspect of its anatomy optimized for the systematic destruction of human life. At 2:15 p.m., the attack began. The hunter had stopped in a clearing to examine tracks when the creature emerged from the tree line with explosive speed that defied its massive size. Thaddius got his first clear view of the attacker, a bipedal nightmare covered in dark, matted fur that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The creature's face was a horrifying amalgamation of human and beast, with features that suggested intelligence but were twisted by malevolence and an insatiable hunger for violence. Its eyes burned with an awareness that was unmistakably conscious, calculating, and utterly without mercy. The intelligence behind those eyes was ancient and malevolent, focused entirely on causing maximum suffering to its human prey. The creature's mouth was filled with teeth that were designed not just for killing, but for the systematic dismantling of its victims while they were still alive. The teeth were arranged in rows like a shark's, but they were larger and more varied in shape, suggesting different functions for different types of tissue destruction. Some were designed for cutting, others for grinding, and still others for the precise extraction of specific anatomical components. The hunter had no time to react. The creature struck with tremendous force, sending him flying across the clearing like a child's toy. The impact was so violent that Thaddius could hear the sound of breaking bones even from his position 300 yards away. The hunter's rifle was torn from his hands and thrown deep into the forest, leaving him completely defenseless against his attacker. Thaddius found himself frozen in absolute terror. His body refused to respond to his mind's desperate commands to move, to run, to do anything. He could only watch in paralyzed horror as the nightmare unfolded before him. His hunting instincts, honed by decades of experience, screamed at him to flee, but his muscles had turned to stone, leaving him trapped in his own body as a helpless witness to unspeakable horror. The creature didn't kill immediately. Instead, it began systematic assault that demonstrated both intelligence and sadistic pleasure in causing suffering. The creature grabbed the hunter by his legs and began swinging him against nearby trees, using the man's body as a weapon against the forest itself. Each impact was calculated to cause maximum damage while keeping the victim alive and conscious for as long as possible. The sounds that emerged from the clearing were unlike anything Thaddius had ever heard. The hunter's screams were not just expressions of pain, they were sounds of absolute terror, the vocalizations of someone who had realized that death would not come quickly or mercifully. The screams echoed across the valley, creating haunting sounds that seemed to energize the creature and drive it to greater heights of violence. Thaddius watched, unable to move, unable to look away, as the creature's face showed obvious pleasure at the sounds of breaking bones and agonized screams. It would pause between impacts, tilting its massive head as if listening to the hunter's screams with the appreciation of a connoisseur. The creature seemed to be savoring the sounds of suffering, taking time to appreciate the fear in its victim's eyes before continuing the systematic destruction of his body. The systematic nature was most disturbing. The creature wasn't acting on instinct or hunger. It was deliberately prolonging suffering, taking obvious pleasure in terror and pain. Each impact was calculated to cause maximum damage while keeping the victim conscious as long as possible. This was not random violence. It was systematic torture conducted by an intelligence that understood exactly what it was doing. After several minutes of this brutal assault, the creature changed tactics. It threw the hunter to the ground and began systematically breaking bones with its massive hands, starting with the man's fingers and working its way up his arms. The creature's movements were deliberate and methodical, suggesting extensive experience with this type of torture. Thaddius's hands shook violently as he tried to process what he was witnessing, but his body remained frozen in place. The creature's hands were perfectly adapted for this work. Its fingers ended in claws that were sharp enough to pierce flesh, but controlled enough to avoid causing immediate death. The creature demonstrated surgical precision in its torture, breaking bones in specific sequences that would maximize pain while preventing shock or unconsciousness. The creature's hands were perfectly designed for systematic torture. Each finger was tipped with a claw that could be used with surgical precision, capable of making cuts that would cause maximum pain without causing fatal blood loss. The creature's grip strength was tremendous, allowing it to apply exactly the right amount of pressure to break bones without crushing them completely. The hunter's screams grew weaker as shock and blood loss began to take their toll, but the creature seemed to understand exactly how to keep its victim conscious and aware of what was happening. It would pause periodically, allowing the hunter to recover slightly before continuing its systematic destruction of his body. During these pauses, the creature would examine its work with obvious satisfaction, flexing the broken limbs and testing the damage it had caused. The creature took particular pleasure in the unnatural angles at which the bones now bent. It would manipulate the broken limbs, creating new configurations of damage and studying the hunter's reactions to different types of pain. The creature was not just torturing its victim, it was conducting experiments, learning about human anatomy and pain tolerance through direct observation and systematic experimentation. Thaddius watched in paralyzed horror as the creature demonstrated knowledge of human anatomy that would be impressive in a medical professional, but was terrifying in a predator. The creature knew exactly which bones to break first, which nerve centers to target, which cuts would cause maximum pain without fatal blood loss. The level of anatomical expertise was disturbing in its implications. The torture continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 to 40 minutes. The creature had developed specific techniques for different types of torture, breaking bones in particular sequences, positioning the victim to maximize both pain and consciousness duration. The level of refinement suggested years of practice on human subjects, perfecting methods through extensive experimentation. The creature's methods were varied and sophisticated. It would twist limbs until joints dislocated, apply pressure to nerve centers to create waves of agony, and use its claws to make precise cuts that would cause maximum pain without causing fatal blood loss. The creature demonstrated knowledge of human anatomy that suggested it had been studying human physiology through direct experimentation for many years. Throughout this prolonged torture, Thaddius remained frozen in his hiding spot, his mind screaming at his body to move, to help, to do something, but his muscles refused to respond. He was trapped in his own paralyzed body, forced to witness every horrific detail of the systematic destruction taking place below. His rifle lay useless in his hands, too far away to be effective even if he could overcome his paralysis. The creature seemed to understand exactly how much damage it could inflict without causing immediate death. It knew which bones to break first, which nerve centers to target, which cuts would cause maximum pain without fatal blood loss. The level of expertise was terrifying in its implications, suggesting that this creature had been perfecting its torture methods through extensive practice on human victims. The creature began experimenting with different torture methods, testing the hunter's responses to various types of trauma. It would apply pressure to specific points on the body, watching with clinical interest as the victim's reactions provided data about human pain thresholds and anatomical vulnerabilities. The systematic nature of this experimentation was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of what Thaddius witnessed. The creature wasn't simply causing pain, it was conducting research, gathering information about human physiology through direct observation and experimentation on a living subject. The creature would create specific types of injuries, then pause to study the effects, taking mental notes about which methods produced the most interesting results. The creature demonstrated knowledge that went far beyond instinctive predation. It understood human anatomy with the precision of a surgeon, knowing exactly which injuries would cause specific types of pain, which damage would be temporary versus permanent, and how to maintain consciousness despite extreme trauma. This level of knowledge could only have been acquired through extensive practice on human subjects. As the torture continued, the creature began to vary its methods, testing different approaches to see which produced the most interesting results. It would break bones in new patterns, apply pressure to different nerve clusters, and create injuries that interacted with each other to produce compound effects. The hunter's body became a canvas for the creature's experimentation. The creature's approach to torture was methodical and scientific, suggesting that it had been refining its techniques through extensive practice on human subjects over many years. Each movement was purposeful, each injury carefully calculated to provide specific information about human physiology and pain tolerance. The creature was building a comprehensive understanding of human suffering through systematic torture. Thaddius watched in horror as the creature began to focus on specific anatomical systems, testing the limits of human endurance in different areas of the body. It would spend long minutes working on individual limbs, studying the effects of different types of damage with the dedication of a researcher conducting important experiments. The creature's torture techniques were sophisticated and refined. It knew how to break bones in ways that would cause maximum pain, how to dislocate joints to create specific types of agony, and how to use its claws to make cuts that would interact with broken bones to produce compound pain effects. The level of sophistication suggested years of practice and refinement. The creature seemed to take particular interest in the hunter's reactions to different types of pain. It would pause after each new injury to study the victim's face, watching for specific responses that would provide information about the effectiveness of different torture methods. The creature was learning, gathering data that would make it even more effective in future attacks. The systematic nature of the experimentation was terrifying in its implications. The creature wasn't just torturing for pleasure, it was conducting research that would improve its methods and make future attacks even more horrific. Each victim was providing data that would be used to refine the creature's techniques and make subsequent tortures more effective. After an eternity of systematic torture and experimentation, the creature began the final phase of its attack. It grabbed the hunter's head in its massive hands and began applying pressure, slowly crushing the skull while the victim remained alive and aware. The hunter's final screams were cut short as his skull collapsed under the tremendous force applied by the creature's powerful hands. The skull-crushing sound was audible even at Thaddius's distance, a wet, grinding noise that spoke of tremendous pressure being applied to bone and brain tissue. The creature held the crushed skull for several moments, seeming to savor the moment of death before finally releasing its grip. The creature's face showed an expression of satisfaction and completion, as if it had achieved some important goal. But the horror wasn't over. The creature began a grotesque post-mortem ritual that revealed the true fate of all the missing hunters. The creature systematically dismantled the body, breaking bones and tearing flesh with methodical precision. It consumed some parts immediately, gnawing on bones to extract marrow while the blood was still fresh, creating sounds that echoed across the valley. The feeding behavior was not random or instinctive. The creature selected specific parts of the body, consuming them in a particular order that suggested ritual significance. It would pause between feeding to examine the remaining corpse, as if planning the next phase of its consumption according to some predetermined protocol that had been developed through years of practice. Thaddius watched in paralyzed revulsion as the creature demonstrated anatomical knowledge that went far beyond simple predation. It knew which organs to consume first, which bones contained the most marrow, which parts of the body would provide the most nutritional value. The creature's feeding was efficient and systematic, suggesting that it had developed these techniques through extensive practice on human victims. The creature's feeding was accompanied by sounds that Thaddius would never forget: the crack of bones being broken, the wet tearing of flesh, and a low rumbling that might have been the creature's expression of satisfaction. The sounds carried across the valley, creating an audio landscape that belonged in the deepest circles of hell rather than any earthly forest. The most disturbing aspect of this post-mortem ritual was the creature's obvious pleasure in its work. It would pause periodically to examine its handiwork, seeming to take satisfaction in the destruction it had caused. This wasn't simple feeding behavior. It was a celebration of violence conducted by an intelligence that understood exactly what it was doing and took pride in its achievements. The creature gathered the remaining bones and body parts, loading them into a crude sack made from animal hide. The creature was collecting trophies, taking parts of its victim back to some unknown location where they would join the remains of all the other missing hunters. The sack itself was disturbing in its implications, clearly handmade and stitched together with what appeared to be sinew or dried intestines. The creature had crafted tools for its hunting activities, suggesting a level of intelligence and planning that went far beyond simple animal behavior. The sack was not the only tool the creature possessed. Thaddius could see other implements hanging from its belt, crude but effective devices that had been designed for specific aspects of hunting and processing human prey. Then came the methodical evidence elimination. The creature systematically eliminated all evidence of what had occurred. It scattered the hunter's gear across a wide area, buried some items, and threw others into dense undergrowth where they would never be found. The creature understood the importance of concealing its activities, suggesting intelligence that went far beyond simple animal cunning. Most disturbing of all was the creature's methodical approach to evidence elimination. It used branches to obscure bloodstains on the ground, moved rocks to cover disturbed earth, and even rearranged vegetation to make the clearing appear undisturbed. The creature understood human search methods and was taking specific steps to ensure that no evidence of its activities would be discovered. The creature's knowledge of human behavior was extensive and terrifying. It knew how search teams operated, what they looked for, and how to eliminate the specific types of evidence that would lead to discovery. This suggested that the creature had been observing human activities for years, learning their methods and developing countermeasures that would allow it to continue its predation without detection. Within 2 hours of the attack, the clearing showed no obvious signs of what had transpired. The creature had removed the body, scattered the evidence, and transformed the scene of brutal murder into what appeared to be an ordinary forest clearing. Any search team that investigated the area would find nothing to indicate what had happened to the missing hunter. As the creature finished its work, it slowly turned and looked directly toward Thaddius's hiding spot. For a terrifying moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, their eyes met across the distance. The creature's gaze held unmistakable intelligence, aware, calculating, and utterly without mercy. In that moment of eye contact, Thaddius realized with absolute certainty that the creature had been aware of his presence throughout the entire attack. It had allowed him to witness its work, perhaps even performed for his benefit, demonstrating its methods and capabilities to someone who would carry the knowledge of its existence back to the human world. The creature's eyes seemed to bore into his soul, evaluating him with the same clinical detachment it had shown while torturing its victim. Thaddius could see the intelligence behind those eyes, making a decision about whether to add him to its collection or allow him to escape with the knowledge of what he had witnessed. That moment of recognition broke Thaddius's paralysis like a gunshot. Pure, primal terror flooded his system, overriding the shock that had kept him frozen for the past 2 hours. His body finally responded to his mind's desperate commands, and he exploded from his hiding spot in blind panic, crashing through the undergrowth without regard for stealth or safety. He crashed through the undergrowth, branches tearing at his clothes and skin as he fled in absolute terror. Behind him, he could hear the creature's roar of rage, a sound that seemed to shake the very mountains, and spoke of fury at having its prey escape. The sound was unlike anything in nature, a vocalization that combined animal rage with intelligent frustration. The sound of massive footsteps thundered behind him, each impact seeming to shake the ground beneath his feet. The creature was pursuing him with the same methodical precision it had shown in its attack. But now there was urgency in its movements, anger at being denied another victim for its collection of human trophies. Thaddius ran with superhuman speed, born of pure terror, crashing through dense forest without regard for the branches that tore at his flesh or the rocks that bruised his feet. He could hear the creature behind him, its breathing like a steam engine, its footsteps getting closer with each passing second. The creature's pursuit was relentless and methodical. As he crashed through a particularly dense thicket, Thaddius caught a glimpse of something that made his blood run even colder. Through the trees to his left, another massive form was moving parallel to his path. At first, he thought it might be another tree or a large boulder, but as his terror-sharpened vision focused, he realized with absolute horror that it was another creature. This second creature was similar in size and build to his pursuer, but it wasn't participating in the chase. Instead, it was simply watching, moving through the forest with the same fluid grace, but maintaining a consistent distance. The creature's posture suggested casual observation rather than active hunting, as if it were merely a spectator to the deadly game unfolding in the forest. The realization that there were multiple creatures in these mountains hit Thaddius like a physical blow. This wasn't an isolated predator. This was evidence of a population, a community of these nightmarish beings that had been systematically hunting human beings in the remote wilderness areas. The implications were staggering and terrifying beyond comprehension. The watching creature's behavior suggested a social structure among these beings. It wasn't interfering with the hunt, respecting what appeared to be territorial boundaries or hunting protocols. The creature seemed content to observe, perhaps learning from the techniques being employed by its companion, or simply enjoying the spectacle of human terror and desperation. As Thaddius continued his desperate flight, he could see the watching creature keeping pace through the trees, its massive form moving with the same silent efficiency that characterized these beings. The creature's eyes were visible even at distance, burning with the same intelligent malevolence that had characterized his pursuer. But there was also something that might have been amusement in its gaze. The presence of the second creature added a new dimension of terror to Thaddius's flight. Not only was he being hunted by one of these nightmarish beings, but he was also being observed by another, as if his desperate attempt to escape was providing entertainment for these ancient predators. The psychological impact of being watched while fleeing for his life was almost as terrifying as the physical pursuit itself. The watching creature's behavior suggested that these beings had developed complex social behaviors around their predation of human beings. There were apparently rules and protocols governing their hunts, territorial boundaries that were respected, and perhaps even hierarchies that determined which creature had the right to pursue specific prey. The pursuit seemed to last forever, though it was probably only minutes. Thaddius's lungs burned, his legs screamed in agony, but the terror of what was behind him and what was watching from the side drove him forward beyond the limits of human endurance. He could feel both creatures' presence like physical weights, pressing against his consciousness and filling him with the absolute certainty that he was completely outmatched. Just when he thought the pursuing creature would catch him, when he could almost feel those claws tearing into his back, Thaddius burst through a line of trees and found himself at the edge of a deep, fast-flowing river. The water was dark and cold, rushing between steep banks with a current that spoke of dangerous depths and hidden obstacles. Without hesitation, driven by pure survival instinct and the absolute certainty that the water offered his only chance of escape, Thaddius launched himself into the churning water. The cold hit him like a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs and shocking his system. The current immediately grabbed him, pulling him downstream with tremendous force that threatened to dash him against the rocks. As he struggled to keep his head above water, fighting against the current that threatened to drag him under and drown him, Thaddius looked back toward the riverbank. Both creatures now stood at the water's edge, their massive forms silhouetted against the darkening sky like primordial nightmares given physical form. The pursuing creature's eyes burned with frustrated rage, but neither creature made any attempt to enter the river. Whether they couldn't swim or simply chose not to pursue him into the water, Thaddius would never know. But their reluctance to follow gave him hope for the first time since the nightmare began. Both creatures watched him with those calculating eyes as the current carried him downstream, their gazes never wavering even as the distance between them increased. There was something almost respectful in their observation, as if they acknowledged that their prey had earned its escape through courage and quick thinking rather than mere luck. The watching creature seemed to communicate something to the pursuer, though Thaddius couldn't hear any sounds over the rushing water. The interaction between the two beings suggested a level of communication and social organization that was terrifying in its implications for human safety in these remote wilderness areas. Thaddius fought against the current, using every ounce of his remaining strength to swim toward the opposite bank. The water was brutally cold, sapping his energy and threatening to drag him under with each passing moment. Several times he went under, swallowing mouthfuls of river water, but somehow he managed to keep fighting against the current that wanted to claim his life. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, Thaddius finally managed to grab hold of a fallen tree branch extending into the water from the opposite bank. Using the last of his strength, he hauled himself out of the river and collapsed on the muddy shore, gasping and shivering uncontrollably from cold and exhaustion. He lay there for a long time, too exhausted to move, too traumatized to think clearly about what he had witnessed. When he finally gathered the strength to look back across the river, both creatures were gone, vanished into the forest as silently as they had appeared, leaving no trace of their presence except for the horrific memories burned into Thaddius's mind. Thaddius spent the night huddled against a tree, too terrified to sleep, jumping at every sound the forest made around him. When dawn broke, he began walking downstream, following the river toward civilization. He was found 24 hours later by a search and rescue team, hypothermic, dehydrated, and in a state of severe psychological shock. The rescuers found him sitting by the riverbank, staring across the water with vacant eyes, muttering incoherently about multiple creatures in the forest. He was immediately airlifted to the nearest hospital, where doctors treated him for exposure and exhaustion, but the physical injuries were nothing compared to the psychological trauma. Thaddius was no longer the confident, experienced hunter who had entered the mountains 3 days earlier. He had become something else, a broken man haunted by knowledge too terrible to share. His claims about multiple creatures were dismissed as hallucinations brought on by exposure and trauma. It was October 21, 2016, when Cara Dange hiked alone into a remote section of Plumas National Forest. Just after midnight, she reached the trailhead northwest of Quincy, drawn back by weeks of strange vocalizations recorded near a dry creek bed, deep sounds that didn't match any known animal and seemed to answer when she approached. Tonight, she brought a camera. The 40-minute hike through dense fog kept her tense. The temperature hovered in the low 40s. By 1 a.m., she crouched near Manzanita for stability, her recorder clipped on, her audio station blinking nearby. Then the forest fell unnaturally quiet. She felt watched before she heard anything at all. A faint sound came from upslope, not a footfall, but the soft compression of forest debris under significant weight. Then nothing. She waited. Her hand tightened slightly on the camera, but she did not move. Minutes passed. The air felt heavier. She caught a scent on the wind, faint and organic. Musky, not the sharp smell of a bear or the distinctive odor of a mountain lion. Something else. Something she could not identify. Another sound. Closer now. The snap of a small twig, followed by absolute stillness. Whatever was out there had stopped moving. It was evaluating her, testing whether she was a threat. She kept her posture relaxed, non-threatening, and waited for it to decide. The motion sensor on her audio station remained green. Whatever was watching her was staying just outside the detection radius. Deliberate, controlled. At 1:14 a.m., she heard the first sound. It came from downslope, maybe 50 feet away, hidden in the fog. A low, guttural hum that lasted 4 seconds and then stopped. The sound was deep enough that she felt it in her chest, a vibration that seemed to resonate through her ribcage. It did not sound like a bear. It did not sound like anything she had encountered before. The tone was controlled, sustained, and deliberate. Cara stood motionless, her pulse quickening. She adjusted the camera angle toward the source of the sound and waited for it to come again. Her breathing slowed. She focused on listening, filtering out the wind, and the distant rustle of branches. 40 seconds passed. Then the sound repeated, this time closer. It was the same low rumble, but shorter, with a rising inflection at the end. It sounded like a question, like the source was testing whether she was still there, like it was trying to provoke a response. She did not respond. She kept her breathing shallow and her movements minimal. The motion sensor on her audio station switched from red to green. Something had entered the detection radius, something large enough to trigger the infrared beam. At 1:17 a.m., she saw movement. A shape emerged from the fog near the creek bed, roughly 40 feet away. It was tall, far taller than any human, and broad through the shoulders. The figure moved slowly, taking deliberate steps through the underbrush. It was upright, walking on two legs, and covered in dark fur or hair that blended with the shadows. The head was massive, the arms hung past the hips, and the posture was stable and controlled. The gait was smooth, not the lumbering shuffle of a bear. What happened next would change everything Cara thought she knew about intelligence in the wild. The creature was not simply searching for food. It was not marking territory. What it was about to do had never been documented in any Sasquatch encounter on record. Cara's hands tightened around the camera. She kept the lens steady, filming the figure as it moved closer to the audio station. The creature stopped approximately 20 feet from the tripod and stood completely still. It was facing the equipment, as if examining it, as if trying to understand what it was. For nearly a minute, nothing happened. The creature did not move. Cara did not move. The only sound was the wind through the trees and the faint hum of the recorder running on her jacket. Then the creature made a sound. It was not the deep rumble from before. This sound was different. It started low, then shifted into a mid-range tone and ended with a sharp exhalation. The rhythm was deliberate, broken into 3 distinct pulses. It sounded almost like speech, like the creature was trying to form words, like it was attempting to mimic the cadence of human language. Cara's breath caught. She had heard vocalizations on her recordings before, but this was different. This was intentional, structured. The creature was attempting to communicate. She stayed silent, unsure of what to do. The creature turned slightly, shifting its weight, and the motion sensor blinked twice before returning to solid green. The figure was still within detection range, but it had moved. It was no longer facing the equipment. It was facing her direction. Cara froze. She could see the outline clearly now. The creature was looking directly at her. It had seen her immediately. At 1:21 a.m., the creature took 2 steps forward. The movement was smooth and controlled, closing the distance to roughly 30 feet. Cara's heart pounded. She considered retreating, but movement might provoke a response. She remained crouched, keeping the camera raised, and filmed. Her hands were steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. The creature stopped again. It tilted its head slightly, as if listening. Then it made another sound. This one was quieter, more controlled, and contained a clear vowel sound in the middle. The sound was drawn out and resonant, followed by a soft consonant at the end. It resembled the structure of human speech, but rendered in a voice too deep and too powerful to belong to any person. Cara realized the creature was experimenting with its voice, testing sounds, exploring what it could produce. She made a decision. She cleared her throat softly, just loud enough to be heard. The creature reacted immediately. Its head snapped toward her, and its body shifted into a slightly crouched posture. For 3 seconds, it remained motionless. Then it repeated the sound it had just made, but louder this time. The vowel sound echoed through the trees, hanging in the cold air. Cara's pulse spiked. She decided to respond. She spoke a single word of greeting, keeping her voice low and calm. The word hung in the air. The creature tilted its head again, processing the sound. Then, after a pause of nearly 10 seconds, it made a sound in response. The sound that came out was deep, guttural, and formless. There was a faint echo of her vocal tone, but nothing resembled actual syllables. It was attempting something, but the result was crude and unrefined. Cara's hands started shaking. She spoke the word again, slower this time, enunciating carefully. The creature responded with another sound. It was no clearer than the first. The vocalization was rough, breathy, with no discernible pattern. Whatever the creature was doing, it was not producing anything close to human speech. Cara felt a mix of fear and awe. She raised the camera higher, ensuring the lens captured the figure in the frame. The recording light blinked steadily, documenting everything. At 1:23 a.m., the creature took several more steps forward, now standing approximately 25 feet away. Cara could see more detail now. The body was covered in dark brown or black hair, matted and uneven. The shoulders were impossibly wide, easily 3 feet across, and the chest was deep and barrel-shaped. The arms were long and muscular, extending well past the hips, and the hands were large, with thick fingers that hung loosely at its sides. The face was partially obscured by shadow, but she could see the shape of a heavy brow ridge and a pronounced jaw. The head was conical, rising to a peak at the crown. The creature shifted its weight, and Cara observed how it moved. The feet were broad and flat, designed for stability on uneven terrain. Each step was planted carefully, heel first, then rolling forward to the toes. The movement was fluid and controlled, nothing like the stiff gait of a person in a costume. The knees bent naturally, absorbing the creature's mass with each shift. Its arms hung loosely at its sides, the hands occasionally flexing open and closed. The fingers were thick and powerful, capable of gripping branches or tearing bark. As she watched, the creature reached out and touched the trunk of a nearby pine tree. The motion was exploratory, not aggressive. It ran its palm down the bark, testing the texture, then brought its hand to its face briefly. Scent checking. The behavior mirrored what she had seen in gorillas investigating new territory. The creature's shoulders rolled as it adjusted its posture. The musculature was dense and powerful, designed for climbing and pulling. The chest expanded with each breath, the ribcage visible beneath the hair. The head turned slowly from side to side, scanning the area with methodical precision. The ears, small and close to the skull, twitched occasionally, tracking sounds Cara could not hear. It crouched slightly and placed one hand on the ground, balancing its weight between 3 points of contact. The posture was cautious, non-threatening, but ready. Cara noticed something else, a smell. It was faint at first, carried on the cold air between them, but it grew stronger as the creature moved. The odor was musky and organic, like wet animal fur mixed with earth and something else she could not identify. It was not unpleasant, but it was distinctly wild. The scent confirmed what her eyes were telling her. This was not a person in a costume. This was a living creature with its own biology, its own presence. The creature's breathing was audible now. Deep, measured breaths that created small clouds of condensation in the cold air. Each exhale produced a soft rushing sound, like wind through a cave opening. The respiratory capacity was enormous. Whatever this creature was, its lungs were far larger than any human's. The creature made another sound. This one was different. It was not a mimicry attempt. It was a vocalization from its own repertoire, a low, rhythmic hum that rose and fell in pitch. The sound lasted nearly 8 seconds and contained multiple tonal shifts. The pattern was structured, but whether it carried specific meaning or was simply a complex call remained unknowable. Cara did not understand the sounds, but she recognized the pattern. The creature remained still and vocalized after she spoke, matching her timing rather than her words. It was not threatening her. It was not charging or displaying aggression. She decided to keep talking. She spoke slowly, enunciating each word, and introduced herself by name. The creature listened. Its head tilted again, and its body remained still. The massive chest rose and fell with each breath. After a pause of nearly 15 seconds, it attempted to respond. The sound that emerged was a low rumble, followed by a sharper vocalization. The sounds were rough and lacked any clear structure. Whatever the creature was doing, it bore no resemblance to speech. She repeated her name alone, speaking it clearly and deliberately. The creature responded with a sound that was low and guttural. There was no clear pattern, no recognizable attempt at replication. It was simply vocalizing in response to her voice. Cara felt tears welling in her eyes, though she did not know if it was from fear or wonder. She was standing face to face with something that was not human, something that was reacting to her movements and voice. At 1:31 a.m., the creature crouched slightly and placed one hand on the ground. The motion was deliberate, non-threatening. It was lowering itself to appear less imposing. Cara noticed the hand was enormous, easily twice the size of her own, with long fingers and thick nails that resembled claws, but appeared blunt. The palm was broad and covered in the same dark hair that covered the rest of the body. The creature made another sound, this time softer. It was a single syllable, drawn out and gentle. The tone was calm, almost soothing. Cara responded in kind, keeping her voice low and steady. She spoke reassuring words, though she suspected the creature understood tone more than language. She told it she meant no harm, that she was simply observing, that she was not a threat. The creature did not repeat her words this time. Instead, it made a series of sounds, separated by pauses. The vocalizations varied in pitch and duration, suggesting some kind of internal structure, but Cara could not identify any patterns that resembled human language. Cara decided to try something. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a granola bar. She unwrapped it slowly, the crinkling of the wrapper loud in the silence. The creature's head shifted immediately, tracking the sound with precision. Cara broke off a piece of the bar and held it out in her open palm, extending her arm slowly and deliberately. She kept her movements non-threatening, her posture relaxed. The creature stared at her hand. It did not move toward her, but it did not retreat either. Its eyes, barely visible in the darkness, remained fixed on the offering. After a long pause of nearly 20 seconds, it made a soft sound, almost like a hum of acknowledgement. Then it stood upright again, rising to its full height of over 7 feet. The motion was fluid, effortless, demonstrating immense strength and balance. Cara lowered her hand, realizing the creature was not interested in the food. It was interested in the interaction itself. At 1:38 a.m., the creature spoke again. This time, the sound was more complex. It started with a low hum, transitioned into a mid-range tone, and ended with what might have been a stopped consonant. The structure suggested deliberate vocal control, but the meaning was impossible to decipher. Cara listened carefully. She responded, keeping her tone gentle. She told the creature she did not understand, but that she was listening. The creature tilted its head, processing her words. Then it repeated the sound. The consistency suggested the vocalization had meaning within the creature's own communication system, but what that meaning was remained unknowable. The creature then did something unexpected. It placed its hand on its own chest, over the area where a human heart would be. The gesture was deliberate. It held the position for 3 seconds while making a low, rumbling sound. The behavior resembled a posture shift or calming gesture, similar to what great apes do when displaying non-aggression. Cara felt a chill run through her. She was witnessing something that defied easy explanation. A creature attempting to interact with her through vocalizations and physical gestures. At 1:43 a.m., the creature made a new sound. This one was sharper, more urgent. It was a single syllable, repeated 3 times in quick succession. The rhythm was staccato, insistent. The tone had shifted from curiosity to urgency. The creature was making an urgent call, trying to focus her awareness on something specific. She responded, telling the creature she was listening, that she was paying attention. The creature took a step back, creating more distance. Its body turned partially toward the forest upslope. One arm moved outward slightly, not a clear point, but a directional motion. The head turned in the same direction. The message was readable, but subtle. Something in that direction had its attention. What the creature had sensed was already approaching. Within minutes, Cara would understand why the creature was trying to warn her, and she would realize that the alarm call it was about to make would be the difference between making it out of the forest alive or becoming another disappearance statistic in Plumas County. Cara followed the line of the creature's gesture, trying to see what it was indicating. She could make out the dark shapes of trees and underbrush. She did not understand what the creature was trying to communicate. Was there something in that direction? Was it warning her? Was it trying to show her something? She looked back at the creature and shook her head slowly, trying to convey her confusion. The creature lowered its arm. It made another sound, this one forceful and sustained. The vocalization was a single sharp exhalation, followed by a drawn-out low tone. It did not sound like any English word, but the urgency was unmistakable. Cara's stomach tightened. Whatever the sound meant in the creature's communication system, the tone conveyed alarm. She asked the creature to clarify, her voice shaking slightly. The creature repeated the sound, louder and more insistent this time. The urgency had intensified. Cara felt a wave of fear wash over her. The creature was not being aggressive, but the urgency in its tone was clear. Something was wrong. Something had changed. The creature had detected something she could not yet perceive. She took a slow step backward, keeping her eyes on the creature. It did not follow. It simply stood there, watching her, its massive frame tense and alert, focused on something beyond her position. At 1:47 a.m., Cara heard another sound. This one did not come from the creature in front of her. It came from deeper in the forest, upslope, in the direction the creature had indicated. It was another vocalization, similar in register, but different in tone, lower, more resonant. The sound carried differently through the trees. The creature in front of her reacted immediately. Its entire posture changed. The shoulders squared, the head lowered slightly. It turned fully toward the new sound and made a sharp vocalization in response. The sound was loud, forceful, and carried territorial assertion. The response from upslope was another deep vocalization. The first creature responded immediately with a louder, more forceful call. The sound resonated through the trees, a deep boom that Cara felt in her chest. It was a territorial assertion, clear and unmistakable. The creature squared its shoulders and turned fully toward the source of the approaching presence. From upslope came another call, lower in pitch and longer in duration. The second creature was answering the challenge. The first creature responded with 3 sharp exhalations in rapid succession, each one louder than the last. The pattern was aggressive, escalating. Then came a sound Cara had only heard in documentaries about gorillas. The first creature grabbed a dead branch from a nearby shrub and snapped it cleanly in half. The crack echoed through the forest. It dropped the broken pieces and made another vocalization, this one sharper and more insistent. The display was unmistakable, a show of strength, a warning. The second creature responded with its own call, but this time the tone had shifted. It was lower, less aggressive. The first creature held its ground, chest expanded, head slightly lowered. It made one more call, sustained and forceful, then waited. Silence. 10 seconds passed. 20. The first creature remained motionless, body oriented upslope, maintaining its defensive posture. Then, faintly, Cara heard movement in the distance. Not approaching, retreating. The second creature was backing down. The first creature did not relax immediately. It remained tense, listening, ensuring the threat had passed. Only after a full minute of silence did its posture begin to shift. The territorial challenge was over. The boundary had been established. The creature made one final vocalization toward the forest, then turned its head back toward Cara. It repeated the urgent sound it had made earlier. The creature took one step in her direction, not threateningly, but insistently. Its body angled slightly toward the trail. The message was clear even without words. She needed to leave. Cara understood. There was another one, and whatever was approaching had triggered a territorial response from the first creature. The creature in front of her was asserting dominance over this section of forest. Cara just happened to be within the boundaries it was defending. She nodded quickly and took another step back, acknowledging the situation. The creature did not respond with vocalizations this time. It simply held its position, body-oriented, toward the source of the approaching threat. Its posture was defensive, territorial. Whatever was coming was violating claimed space, and the first creature was making its stance clear. Cara turned and moved quickly but carefully through the underbrush, heading back toward the trail. She kept the camera running, though she was no longer filming anything useful. Her focus was on getting out. She heard another exchange of vocalizations in the distance. The two creatures were still calling back and forth, establishing territorial boundaries through sound. She did not look back. She moved as quickly as the terrain allowed, her headlamp cutting through the darkness. The forest felt different now. The atmosphere had shifted. As she moved, she became aware of movement somewhere in the forest to her left. Not close, but present. She could hear occasional sounds through the undergrowth, but nothing that suggested active pursuit. Whatever was out there was moving through its own territory, not chasing her specifically. Cara maintained her pace. Her heart hammered. The sounds to her left faded after another minute. The forest went quiet again. By 1:52 a.m., she reached the trail. She broke into a jog, her breath coming in short bursts. She did not stop until she was back at the trailhead, standing next to her vehicle with the doors locked. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip the keys. She sat in the driver's seat for 10 minutes, her hands still shaking, her heart still racing, before she finally started the engine. She drove back to Quincy in silence, replaying the encounter in her mind. The creature had made vocalizations in response to her voice, and when a territorial dispute began, she had been caught in the middle. The first creature's behavior had bought her time to leave, whether intentionally or simply as a side effect of defending its claimed area. The following morning, Cara reviewed the footage on her camera. The video was low resolution and obscured, but the audio was clear. She could hear her own voice, followed by the creature's vocalizations. The sounds were deep, guttural, and bore no resemblance to human speech. She could hear the rhythmic calls. She could hear the final urgent sound before she fled. She played the segments repeatedly. The creature had not produced recognizable words. The vocalization showed some variation, but remained rough and formless. There was no clear pattern of improvement or imitation. What struck her most was the reactivity. The creature did not vocalize randomly. When she made sounds, it responded with its own calls. The exchange had a back-and-forth quality, though the content remained unintelligible. The chest gesture replayed in her mind. The creature had made a deliberate physical motion while vocalizing. The behavior suggested a non-threatening display, though its exact purpose was unclear. Cara saved the file and made multiple backups across different devices and cloud storage. She considered submitting the evidence to the Forest Service or to academic institutions, but she hesitated. The encounter had been too personal, too profound, to hand over to an agency that might dismiss or bury it. The creature had engaged with her in a way she never thought possible. Instead, she kept the footage private. She shared it with only a handful of trusted colleagues under strict confidentiality agreements. The responses were mixed. Some believed the audio was authentic and represented groundbreaking evidence of non-human speech capability. Others questioned the source, suggesting the sounds could have been produced by a human hoaxer or misidentified wildlife. The debate would likely continue for years, but Cara knew what she had experienced. She had been there. She had seen the creature standing less than 25 feet away. She had heard it vocalize in response to her voice. She had heard the urgent calls when territorial conflict began. The creature had not tried to harm her. It had engaged in what appeared to be responsive behavior, though the exact nature of the interaction remained ambiguous. And when another presence arrived, the territorial response had given her the opportunity to leave. Cara returned to the site twice in the following weeks, but she never encountered the creature again. The motion-triggered audio stations continued recording for another month, but the vocalizations stopped. The forest fell silent. Whatever had been there was gone, or had chosen to remain hidden. She completed her graduate program in 2019 and moved to Oregon, where she now works as a conservation biologist. She rarely discusses the encounter, but in private, she has never wavered about what happened that night. The creature was real. The sounds were real. For a few minutes in a fog-covered forest, a human and an unknown primate exchanged sounds that neither fully understood. The footage remains in her possession. No agency has confirmed it, and no similar recordings have surfaced. What stays with her is the memory of a creature responding to her voice, and the realization that its warning gave her the chance to escape. On October 15, 2014, Ranger David Krueger's body cam caught a Bigfoot encounter so terrifying, Yellowstone National Park officials spent years trying to hide it from the world. What he witnessed was mankind's biggest mystery, captured right on camera. David had worked for 11 years in Yellowstone's backcountry, and his October 15th morning started with reports from experienced backpackers near Cache Creek. They'd heard sounds that didn't match any known animal, deep whooping sounds in call and response patterns. But these were not mating calls, nor territorial warnings. It sounded like an actual language. What Krueger didn't know yet was that his body cam would soon capture proof of exactly what those sounds meant. The Cache Creek was a common Bigfoot habitat, remote enough for privacy and close enough to major trail systems to monitor human activity. If you wanted to disappear for a while, this was the perfect place. At 2:15 p.m., Krueger headed toward the area on foot. The route took him through dense pine forests and natural bottlenecks, exactly the kind of terrain where something smart could stay hidden. If there were Bigfoots here, they'd be able to watch his every step and choose exactly where any encounter would happen. Krueger didn't realize he was walking into a funnel, and his body cam was recording every step. The body cam footage from the first mile shows subtle signs that something unusual was happening. Animal activity was way below normal levels for that season and time of the day. Birds were present, but seemed nervous, with flight patterns that suggested they were deliberately avoiding certain areas of the forest. The big question was why? Why were they avoiding those areas? At 3:47 p.m., Krueger found physical evidence that switched his investigation from checking out weird reports to documenting creatures that weren't supposed to exist. He found footprints, larger than a human. Now these footprints measured 16 inches long and 8 inches wide, measurements that could only be made by something walking upright on two legs while weighing between 600 and 800 pounds. The footprints showed characteristics that were unmistakably consistent with authentic Bigfoot track evidence. 5 distinct toes with clear joint articulation, an opposable thumb arrangement that proved these creatures had hands capable of grasping and manipulating objects, and dermal ridge patterns that showed these definitely weren't fake carvings or misidentified bear prints. What made these tracks especially important was their freshness and the direction they indicated Bigfoot had been traveling. The prints were less than 12 hours old, made during the same time period when campers had reported coordinated vocalizations that suggested multiple Bigfoots were operating as a team in the immediate area. The tracks headed directly toward dense forest cover where intelligent creatures could watch human activity while staying completely hidden. Krueger spent 20 minutes carefully documenting every detail of the footprints, taking measurements and filming them from multiple angles. His body cam captured detailed footage that would later prove crucial when specialists analyzed it. The trail of footprints led directly into elevated terrain. Krueger followed the tracks for about half a mile before losing them on rocky ground that wouldn't hold impressions, but the direction was unmistakable. Whatever had made those prints was moving toward elevated positions that would provide excellent observation points for monitoring human activity in the valley below. The body cam timestamp shows 4:03 p.m. when Krueger made a discovery that revealed just how sophisticated Bigfoot's behavior really was. he found additional footprints that weren't following the same route as the previous tracks, but were paralleling his own path with disturbing precision. These newer tracks stayed about 40 yards to his right, matching his speed and direction perfectly while maintaining distance that kept the Bigfoot just outside normal human detection range. This was absolutely terrifying when you really thought about what it meant. Bigfoot wasn't just randomly traveling through the same area where Krueger happened to be hiking. It was deliberately following him, studying how he moved, staying at surveillance distance that allowed the creature to observe human behavior while remaining completely hidden. The parallel tracks showed that Bigfoot deliberately stepped in locations that minimized ground disturbance and reduced the risk of leaving obvious signs that might alert its human target to the surveillance operation. This level of tactical sophistication demonstrated that these creatures understood human tracking techniques and could counter standard methods used to detect wildlife in forests. On the audio, you could hear it. The woods had gone quiet. At 4:12 p.m., the Bigfoot that had been stalking Krueger revealed itself through vocalizations that demonstrated the sophisticated communication capabilities that made these creatures so remarkable and dangerous. The first call came from the forest to Krueger's right, exactly where the parallel tracks suggested his pursuer was positioned. The vocalization was unlike anything in standard wildlife biology, combining incredible depth and complexity that proved it was intentional communication rather than an instinctive animal response. The sound lasted about 6 seconds. You can hear it clearly on the recording, harmonic variations that suggest actual language capability. 3 minutes later, the vocalization was repeated from a completely different location, proving the creature had moved while maintaining perfect surveillance of Krueger's position. Then a third call came from Krueger's left side, revealing that multiple Bigfoots were now involved in what appeared to be a coordinated operation designed to surround him and control his movement options. These creatures were talking to each other while positioning themselves tactically to maximize their advantage in whatever confrontation they were planning. The Bigfoot calls continued at irregular intervals as the creatures maneuvered through the forest around Krueger's position. The body cam audio picks up each call clearly, immediately answered by others, creating a communication network that allowed real-time coordination of their positioning and adjustments based on how Krueger was moving. At 4:19 p.m., Krueger entered a small clearing where the afternoon sunlight provided perfect conditions for what would become the most detailed visual documentation of Bigfoot appearance and behavior ever recorded. And then, the camera finally captures it in full view. The lead Bigfoot stood about 60 yards ahead, positioned beside a fallen tree, where it had apparently been doing some kind of foraging while maintaining observation of the approaching human. This Bigfoot was absolutely massive, beyond anything Krueger could have imagined possible for any North American creature. Standing fully upright, it was at least 7.5 feet tall, with a body structure that combined human-like proportions with muscle mass that exceeded anything in known animal anatomy. The shoulders were incredibly broad, supporting arms that hung past where the knees would be on a human, ending in hands that showed remarkable size and obvious dexterity. The creature was covered in dark brown hair that hung in thick clumps over visible muscle definition, dense, well-maintained, not the messy coat people usually described. The head combined human and ape features, cone-shaped skull with a pronounced sagittal crest. The face showed intelligence, despite features clearly adapted for a different evolutionary path. The eyes were positioned forward like a predator's. They showed awareness, conscious thought, not instinct. Bigfoot was thinking. For 8 seconds, Krueger watched it forage near the log. The hands manipulated decaying wood with precision, searching for grubs or protein, purposeful, deliberate movements. The body cam captures the exact moment. The Bigfoot turned and made direct eye contact. The eyes were positioned forward like a predator's, locked directly on Krueger with an intensity that was impossible to ignore. They showed awareness, conscious thought, not instinct. The creature wasn't reacting on autopilot like an animal caught off guard. The Bigfoot was thinking, processing, and evaluating the human standing in front of it. Those eyes held calculation and intent that went far beyond anything you'd see in even the most intelligent animals. The moment lasted 2 seconds. Krueger saw it happen in real time. Recognition, assessment, decision. The creature's expression shifted from evaluation to aggression. Lips pulled back, revealing teeth designed for meat, a clear threat display. The roar, captured on audio so clearly you can feel it, was unlike anything in documented wildlife. And the message was unmistakable: leave now or die. Krueger ran. Behind him, the creature didn't panic. It moved with controlled aggression, completely confident it could end the chase whenever it wanted. The Bigfoot covered ground with enormous strides, maintaining perfect balance even on difficult terrain. Each step covered what would take Krueger 3 or 4. You could hear controlled breathing aside from Krueger's tedious breathing, much different from his that was so clear in the audio, but a steady, effortless rhythm. The creature wasn't even trying. It was controlling the chase. During the chase, Krueger heard his pursuer making shorter calls that were immediately answered from other locations throughout the forest. Bigfoot was communicating with the others, coordinating positions, sharing information about his movements and potential escape routes. The forest erupted with answering calls from multiple directions. Krueger wasn't being chased by a single creature, but by a coordinated group positioned to cut off every escape route. The Bigfoot family worked together with tactical sophistication, controlling his movements to ensure the outcome they wanted. 90 seconds in, it became clear that the lead Bigfoot was controlling the distance rather than pursuing at full speed. The sounds would surge closer. Krueger could hear its breathing, its footsteps, then fall back, maintaining psychological pressure without overtaking him. This wasn't normal predatory behavior. This was psychological warfare conducted by something intelligent enough to understand the terror value of controlled intimidation. The pursuit behavior demonstrated intelligence and tactical thinking that went beyond what anyone expected. These beings understood human psychology well enough to maximize fear while maintaining complete control over the encounter. At 4:20 p.m., the psychological intimidation ended. Krueger stumbled over an exposed root and crashed to the forest floor. His body cam recorded the impact and the terrifying speed with which the creature closed the final distance. Before Krueger could even attempt to get up, Bigfoot was on top of him. The camera shakes violently as a massive hand grabbed Krueger's shoulder and flipped him from face down to face up with casual effort that revealed how completely outmatched human strength was against Bigfoot power. The creature could have caused devastating injury, but was choosing to demonstrate dominance instead. Up close, the Bigfoot was even more incredible and terrifying than it had appeared from a distance. The facial features showed unmistakable intelligence despite anatomical adaptations for a completely different evolutionary pathway. The eyes held awareness and evaluation, conscious thought, not instinct. The creature was studying Krueger with what looked like scientific curiosity, while simultaneously asserting physical dominance, leaving no doubt about who controlled the encounter. The creature's breath carried the smell of meat and organic matter, a diet completely outside human experience. When it opened its mouth, the teeth were adapted for crushing and tearing with strength far beyond human capability, designed for prey that would challenge even the largest known predators. When Krueger tried to draw his sidearm, the creature's response made human defenses completely useless. One casual swipe sent the weapon spinning into the underbrush with enough force to bend the metal frame. The movement was so fast that Krueger's eyes couldn't even track it. Bigfoot grabbed both of Krueger's legs and began dragging him across the forest floor. Krueger tried to slow himself by clawing at the ground, but his efforts were useless against the strength that treated his body weight as negligible. After about 20 feet, the creature stopped and positioned itself directly over him in a dominance display that left no doubt about the power hierarchy. This was the moment Krueger was certain he was about to die. Everything about the encounter had demonstrated that human technology, training, and physical capability were meaningless against creatures that combined apex predator strength with intelligence that approached or exceeded human strategic thinking. There was no reasonable expectation he would survive whatever came next. But instead of attacking, the creature released a shorter, sharper vocalization. The body cam catches it all. Within seconds, 2 additional Bigfoots emerged from concealed positions in the surrounding forest. Krueger had been completely surrounded throughout the entire encounter. The coordination required for this positioning demonstrated tactical planning and operational discipline that exceeded anything in known animal social structures. The second Bigfoot was slightly smaller than the first, possibly female, with similar dark brown coloring but less pronounced muscular development and a smaller sagittal ridge that might indicate sexual dimorphism. The third was clearly a juvenile, approximately 4 feet tall, but already showing the robust build that would eventually make it as formidable as the adults. This was a family unit with protective motivations and social bonds that would influence how they managed human contact. The 3 creatures positioned themselves around Krueger in a triangular formation, demonstrating coordinated tactical thinking. Their positioning prevented escape in any direction, while allowing each creature to maintain visual contact with the others for continued communication. The formation was precisely calculated to maximize control while minimizing the possibility that Krueger could create unexpected complications. The communication between the 3 Bigfoots was remarkably complex. The vocalizations were subtle and controlled, suggesting language capability that allowed detailed coordination without creating noise that might attract other humans. The creatures were clearly discussing Krueger, his status, his equipment, their intentions for how this would end. All 3 showed intense interest in Krueger's technology and equipment. The footage shows the juvenile leaning in close, its face filling the frame as it examines the body cam itself with obvious curiosity. Carefully examining his uniform, radio, and body cam with obvious curiosity about human capabilities. The footage also shows the possible female studying his boots and clothing with attention that suggested she was documenting human appearance and equipment for future reference. Their behavior indicated they understood that human technology represented capabilities that could affect future encounters, and that gathering intelligence about it was strategically important for their own security and avoiding detection. Their curiosity was scientific rather than casual. These beings understood cause and effect and were actively learning about human capabilities that might impact their survival and territorial control. The examination continued for approximately 5 minutes as the creatures communicated in their vocal language about whatever conclusions they were drawing about human technology and Krueger's role as a ranger. Their discussion was clearly detailed and analytical, suggesting cognitive capabilities that allowed complex information processing and strategic decision-making about the long-term implications of human contact. The adult male made a final vocalization that seemed to conclude their analysis and communicate their decision. The message was unmistakable, conveyed through posture, vocal tone, and direct eye contact, transcending language and conveying a crystal-clear meaning about territorial ownership and human status within their territory. The message was simple and clear. This territory belongs to us. You exist here only because we allow it. Leave now and do not return, or the next encounter will end differently. The 3 Bigfoots turned and walked back into the forest, moving silently despite their massive size and the dense undergrowth. Their departure was as controlled and tactical as their approach, demonstrating stealth capabilities that would make them nearly impossible to track unless they chose to reveal themselves. Within seconds, they had vanished completely into terrain that offered limited concealment, proving their knowledge of the environment and movement skills were far superior to anything human tracking could match. Krueger remained motionless on the ground for a full minute after the creatures disappeared, too stunned to process the implications of surviving an encounter that should have ended with his death. Everything about the interaction had demonstrated that these creatures possessed intelligence, tactical capability, and physical dominance that made them the true controllers of wilderness territory humans believed they managed. The Bigfoot family's behavior revealed social structure, communication capabilities, and strategic thinking that challenged every assumption about what kinds of intelligent life existed in North America's wilderness. Their coordination, restraint, and territorial messaging indicated these creatures were far more than the primitive forest dwellers most people imagined. They were intelligent beings with sophisticated understanding of human behavior and the strategic implications of contact between species. Most remarkably, the creatures had chosen to demonstrate their dominance without killing, suggesting decision-making that included consideration of long-term consequences and strategic thinking about human Bigfoot relationships beyond immediate territorial defense. Their message had been delivered with precision that ensured understanding while avoiding escalation that might attract unwanted attention from authorities or military response. The body cam footage of this entire encounter would provide unprecedented documentation of Bigfoot intelligence, behavior, and capabilities that challenged everything mainstream science believed about primate evolution and cognitive development. The 3 hours and 43 minutes of high-definition video and audio represented the most comprehensive evidence ever recorded of creatures whose existence had implications extending into questions of national security and human dominance over North American wilderness. The footage documented creatures that possessed tactical coordination, sophisticated communication, advanced problem-solving, and social structure, indicating intelligence approaching or potentially exceeding human cognitive capability in wilderness survival and territorial management. Most significantly, it provided evidence that these beings had been studying human behavior for extended periods, learning operational protocols, and developing strategic approaches to contact that allowed them to maintain complete control over when and how encounters occurred. What made this footage remarkable was how it revealed Bigfoot intelligence operating on multiple levels simultaneously. These creatures were conducting surveillance, coordinating family activities, assessing human technology, making tactical decisions about threats, and communicating complex information between individuals, all while managing a contact situation that required split-second adjustments. The family demonstrated understanding of human psychology that allowed them to maximize intimidation while controlling escalation, knowledge of forest ecosystems that gave them complete tactical advantage, and decision-making that weighed long-term strategic considerations against immediate territorial defense. These were not primitive creatures responding to instinct. These were intelligent beings making calculated decisions about how to manage their relationship with a species they recognized as technologically advanced but physically inferior. Ranger David Krueger's body cam footage proves that North America's wilderness areas are home to creatures whose intelligence and capabilities pose a fundamental challenge to human assumptions about which species actually control these environments and what kinds of encounters might be possible when humans venture into territory these beings consider their own. The implications extend beyond proving Bigfoots exist. It demonstrates that these creatures have successfully managed human contact for decades or centuries, revealing themselves only when it serves their objectives, while maintaining security that has kept their true capabilities hidden from scientific investigation. On August 12, 2022, 31-year-old Marcus Chen pitched his tent in what he thought would be a peaceful spot along the Cascade River in North Cascades National Park, Washington. A software engineer from Seattle who had been camping solo for over 6 years, Marcus was seeking a weekend escape from the digital world that consumed his weekdays. What began as a routine 2-night camping trip to clear his head would become the most harrowing experience of his life and challenge everything he thought he knew about what lurked in the Pacific Northwest wilderness. Marcus Chen had always been drawn to solitude. Growing up in the suburbs of Seattle, he discovered early that nature provided the perfect antidote to his high-stress career in tech. Every few weeks, he would load his Honda Civic with camping gear and disappear into the mountains, often not speaking to another human being for days at a time. His friends at work thought he was crazy for camping alone, but Marcus found these solo adventures essential for his mental health and creativity. The North Cascades had become Marcus's favorite destination over the past 2 years. The rugged peaks, pristine alpine lakes, and dense old-growth forests offered the kind of raw wilderness experience that was becoming increasingly rare in the Pacific Northwest. He had explored dozens of trails throughout the region, always seeking more remote locations where he could truly disconnect from civilization. For this particular August weekend, Marcus had chosen a relatively unknown camping spot along the Cascade River, about 15 miles from the nearest paved road. He had discovered the location through an obscure hiking forum, where a fellow backpacker had mentioned a hidden meadow beside the river that offered spectacular views of the surrounding peaks. The description promised solitude and natural beauty, exactly what Marcus was seeking. Marcus arrived at the trailhead on Friday afternoon, August 12, 2022, after taking a half-day off work. The parking area was completely empty, which wasn't unusual for such a remote location on a weekday. He spent 30 minutes organizing his gear and checking his equipment, including a new lightweight tent he was eager to test and a high-end sleeping bag rated for temperatures down to 20 degrees. His pack weighed 38 pounds, loaded with 2 nights' worth of food, camping essentials, and a few luxury items like a portable camp chair and a paperback novel he'd been meaning to read. Marcus had learned from years of solo camping that comfort items were worth their weight when you were spending extended time alone in the wilderness. The hike to his chosen campsite took just over 2 hours, following an old logging road that gradually narrowed into a single-track trail. The path wound through dense stands of Douglas fir and western hemlock, crossing several small creeks before opening into the meadow that had been described in the forum post. The location was even more beautiful than Marcus had imagined. A grassy clearing beside the rushing Cascade River, surrounded by towering peaks and ancient trees. Marcus spent the remainder of Friday afternoon setting up his camp and exploring the immediate area. He positioned his tent on a slight rise about 50 yards from the river, providing good drainage and a clear view of the surrounding forest. The spot felt perfect, secluded enough for complete privacy, but open enough to feel safe and comfortable. As evening approached, Marcus prepared a simple dinner on his camp stove while enjoying the peaceful sounds of the river and the gradual transition from daylight to dusk. He had always loved this time of day in the wilderness, when the forest seemed to come alive with subtle sounds and movements. The stress of his work week began to melt away as he settled into the rhythm of camp life. That first night passed without incident. Marcus slept soundly in his new tent, lulled by the constant sound of flowing water and the gentle rustling of wind through the trees. He woke refreshed on Saturday morning, looking forward to a full day of hiking and photography in the surrounding area. Saturday proved to be everything Marcus had hoped for. He spent the morning exploring upstream along the river, discovering hidden pools and small waterfalls that would have made perfect swimming holes if the water hadn't been so cold. The afternoon was devoted to hiking up a steep ridge that offered panoramic views of the North Cascades wilderness, stretching endlessly in all directions. As Marcus made his way back to camp in the late afternoon, he noticed something that hadn't been there when he left that morning. Near the edge of his campsite, pressed into a patch of soft earth beside the river, was what appeared to be a large footprint. The impression was roughly 14 inches long and significantly wider than any human foot, with clearly defined toe marks that suggested whatever made it had been walking upright. Marcus knelt beside the print, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. His first thought was that it might be a bear track, but the shape was all wrong. Bears left claw marks and had a completely different foot structure. This print looked disturbingly human-like, but far too large to have been made by any person. He spent several minutes examining the track, taking photos with his phone and trying to think of rational explanations. The print was fresh, made sometime during the day while he was away from camp. The depth suggested something very heavy, probably weighing several hundred pounds. Most puzzling was the fact that there was only one clear print visible, as if whatever made it had been careful to step only in that one spot of soft ground. Marcus searched the surrounding area for additional tracks, but found nothing conclusive. There were some disturbed areas in the vegetation, and what might have been partial impressions in harder ground, but nothing as clear as the single print near his tent. The discovery left him feeling unsettled, though he tried to rationalize it as probably being from some large animal he wasn't familiar with. As darkness fell on Saturday night, Marcus found himself more alert than usual to the sounds around his campsite. Every snap of a twig or rustle in the bushes seemed amplified, and he caught himself straining to listen for anything unusual. He had never been particularly nervous about camping alone, but the mysterious footprint had planted a seed of unease that he couldn't shake. Marcus eventually fell asleep around 11 p.m., but his rest was fitful and interrupted by strange dreams. He found himself waking periodically throughout the night, listening to the forest sounds and trying to determine if anything was out of place. Each time he woke, the wilderness seemed normal, just the usual symphony of insects, small animals, and wind through the trees. It was during one of these periods of light sleep, sometime around 3:30 a.m., that Marcus became aware of something moving near his tent. At first, he thought he might be dreaming, but the sounds were too distinct and too close to be imagination. Heavy footsteps were circling his campsite, moving with deliberate slowness as if trying not to make noise. Marcus lay perfectly still in his sleeping bag, his heart beginning to race as he realized this was no dream. Something large was walking around his tent, staying just far enough away to remain hidden in the darkness, but close enough that he could hear every footfall. The steps had a rhythm that suggested bipedal movement, not the four-legged gait of a bear or other large animal. For nearly 10 minutes, Marcus listened to the creature moving around his campsite. The footsteps would pause occasionally, as if whatever was out there was studying his tent or listening for signs of movement inside. During these pauses, Marcus could hear what sounded like heavy breathing, deep and rhythmic, like that of a large mammal. Then, without warning, the footsteps stopped directly beside his tent. Marcus could sense a massive presence just inches away from where he lay, separated only by the thin nylon wall of his shelter. His entire body was rigid with fear, and he found himself holding his breath as he tried to remain as still and quiet as possible. What happened next would haunt Marcus for months afterward. Something began to gently press against the side of his tent, as if a large hand was exploring the fabric. The pressure moved slowly along the wall, starting near his feet and gradually working its way toward his head. Marcus could feel the tent wall bowing inward under the weight of whatever was touching it. The exploration continued for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes. Marcus lay frozen, afraid that any movement might provoke whatever was outside his tent. The pressure was firm but not aggressive, more curious than threatening. It was as if something was trying to understand what the tent was and what might be inside it. Then came the moment that would change Marcus's life forever. As the pressure reached the area near his head, Marcus heard a sound that made his blood run cold, a low, rumbling vocalization that was unlike anything he had ever heard. It wasn't quite a growl, but it wasn't human either. The sound seemed to come from deep within a massive chest, resonating with intelligence and what could only be described as curiosity. Unable to contain his terror any longer, Marcus's body betrayed him with an involuntary gasp. The sound was barely audible, but it was enough. The pressure against his tent wall immediately stopped, and Marcus could sense the presence outside, shifting its attention directly toward where he lay. For several seconds, there was complete silence. Marcus could feel eyes watching him through the tent wall, studying him with an intelligence that was both alien and disturbingly familiar. The sensation was overwhelming, like being examined by something that understood exactly what he was, but remained completely unknown to him. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the encounter ended. Marcus heard the heavy footsteps moving away from his tent, but instead of the careful, stealthy movement from before, the creature now moved with purpose and surprising grace. Within moments, the sounds faded into the distance, leaving Marcus alone with his racing heart and the terrifying knowledge of what had just occurred. Marcus didn't sleep for the rest of the night. He lay in his sleeping bag until dawn, listening for any sign that the creature might return. Every sound in the forest seemed magnified, every shadow outside his tent a potential threat. When the first light of morning finally appeared, Marcus had never been so grateful to see the sun. His first instinct was to pack up immediately and hike out, but daylight brought a measure of courage and curiosity that overrode his fear. Marcus needed to understand what had happened, and he knew that leaving without investigating would haunt him forever. He spent the morning carefully examining the area around his tent, looking for any evidence of his nighttime visitor. What he found exceeded his worst fears and wildest expectations. The ground around his campsite was covered with tracks, dozens of clear footprints that told the story of his encounter in disturbing detail. The prints showed that something large and bipedal had indeed circled his tent multiple times, approaching from different angles as if studying the best way to investigate. The clearest prints were near where Marcus had felt the pressure against his tent wall. These impressions showed remarkable detail. Individual toe marks, what appeared to be dermal ridges, and pressure patterns that indicated a creature of immense weight and size. Most unsettling was the depth and clarity of the prints, which suggested that whatever made them had been moving very slowly and deliberately. Marcus spent over an hour documenting the tracks with his phone camera, taking measurements and trying to create a record of what he had experienced. The prints varied in size, but averaged around 15 inches in length and 7 inches in width. The stride length suggested something much taller than a human, but walking upright like one. As he studied the evidence, Marcus began to realize the full implications of what had occurred. This wasn't a case of mistaken identity or an overactive imagination. Something unknown and intelligent had visited his campsite, examined his tent, and demonstrated a level of curiosity and restraint that was both fascinating and terrifying. The decision to stay for his planned second night was one of the most difficult Marcus had ever made. Every rational part of his mind screamed at him to pack up and leave immediately, but his curiosity and a strange sense that he had been chosen for this experience kept him rooted to the spot. He spent Sunday hiking in the surrounding area, but his mind kept returning to the events of the previous night and the possibility that they might be repeated. As evening approached on Sunday, Marcus found himself both dreading and anticipating what might happen. He prepared for bed with a mixture of fear and excitement, wondering if his mysterious visitor would return. He had positioned his phone within easy reach, hoping to capture audio or video evidence if another encounter occurred. Sunday night passed without incident, much to Marcus's relief and slight disappointment. He slept better than he had expected, though he remained alert to every sound throughout the night. When morning came, he found no new tracks around his campsite, suggesting that whatever had visited him on Saturday night had moved on or lost interest. Marcus packed up his camp on Monday morning with mixed emotions. Part of him was relieved to be leaving the site of such a terrifying experience, but another part felt like he was walking away from the most significant event of his life. The drive back to Seattle gave him time to process what had happened and decide what to do with his incredible story. His first instinct was to keep the experience to himself. Marcus knew that telling people about his encounter would likely result in skepticism, ridicule, or worse. His career in tech required a reputation for rational thinking and logical problem-solving. Claiming to have been visited by Bigfoot would not enhance his professional standing, but the evidence was too compelling to ignore. Marcus had dozens of clear photographs of the footprints, and the memory of his encounter was burned into his consciousness with perfect clarity. He began researching similar experiences online, discovering a vast community of people who had reported comparable encounters throughout the Pacific Northwest. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a wildlife biologist at the University of Washington who had been quietly studying Bigfoot reports for over a decade, became Marcus's first contact in the scientific community. She had seen countless hoaxes and misidentifications, but Marcus's photographs and detailed account impressed her with their consistency and credibility. Dr. Mitchell explained that Marcus's experience fit a pattern she had been documenting for years. Encounters that suggested these creatures were not only real, but possessed a level of intelligence and curiosity that mainstream science was reluctant to acknowledge. The gentle, exploratory nature of Marcus's encounter was particularly significant, as it suggested behavior that was investigative rather than aggressive. The analysis of Marcus's footprint photographs revealed details that would be nearly impossible to fabricate. The print showed anatomical features consistent with a large bipedal primate, including pressure patterns that indicated how weight was distributed during walking. Most compelling were the dermal ridges visible in several of the clearest prints, details that would require sophisticated knowledge of primate anatomy to fake convincingly. Marcus's story began to spread through the cryptozoology community, attracting attention from researchers around the world. His account was notable not just for the physical evidence he had collected, but for the intimate nature of his encounter. Most Bigfoot sightings involve brief glimpses of creatures at a distance. Marcus had experienced prolonged close contact that provided unprecedented insights into the behavior of these mysterious beings. The psychological impact of his experience was profound. Marcus found himself changed by his encounter, more aware of the mysteries that still existed in the natural world, and less certain about the boundaries between the known and unknown. His weekend camping trips took on new meaning as he searched for additional evidence and hoped for another encounter with the creature that had visited his tent. 6 months after his original experience, Marcus returned to the same campsite, hoping to find additional evidence or perhaps encounter his mysterious visitor again. The location looked exactly as he remembered, but despite spending 3 nights in the same spot, nothing unusual occurred. The creature, whatever it was, had moved on or chosen not to reveal itself again. Marcus's encounter has become one of the most well-documented and credible Bigfoot reports in recent years. His background in technology, the quality of his photographic evidence, and the detailed nature of his account have convinced many researchers that he experienced something genuinely extraordinary. The gentle, curious behavior he described has added new dimensions to our understanding of how these creatures might interact with humans. The creature that visited Marcus's tent on that August night in 2022 remains as mysterious as ever. But the brief contact between human and unknown being has provided a glimpse into a hidden world that exists parallel to our own, reminding us that even in our modern age of scientific advancement, the wilderness still holds secrets that challenge our understanding of what's possible. Marcus continues to camp in the North Cascades, always hoping for another encounter, but never again experiencing anything like that terrifying and wonderful night when something unknown chose to investigate his tent. His story serves as a reminder that sometimes the most profound experiences come not from seeking them out, but from remaining open to the extraordinary encounters that await those brave enough to venture alone into the wild places where mystery still lives. The truth about what pressed against Marcus's tent wall that night may never be fully understood, but his experience has opened new avenues of research and added to the growing body of evidence that suggests we are not alone in the wilderness. Sometimes, in the deepest forests of the Pacific Northwest, we are the ones being watched, studied, and perhaps even protected by intelligences that remain just beyond our understanding. The months following Marcus's encounter brought unexpected changes to his life that extended far beyond his camping habits. His story, initially shared only with Dr. Mitchell and a small circle of researchers, began to attract attention from documentary filmmakers, podcasters, and journalists specializing in unexplained phenomena. Marcus found himself reluctantly thrust into a spotlight he had never sought, becoming a reluctant spokesperson for an experience he was still trying to fully understand. The first major media attention came from a popular paranormal podcast called Wilderness Mysteries, whose host had heard about Marcus's encounter through the Cryptozoology Research Network. The 3-hour interview recorded in Marcus's Seattle apartment became one of the show's most downloaded episodes. Marcus's calm, technical approach to describing his experience, treating it like a software problem to be analyzed and understood, resonated with listeners who were tired of sensationalized Bigfoot stories. The podcast's success led to more interview requests, and Marcus found himself walking a careful line between sharing his story and maintaining his privacy. His colleagues at the tech company where he worked began to take notice, though most were surprisingly supportive. The tech industry, it turned out, was full of people who spent their weekends hiking in the same wilderness areas where Marcus had his encounter. Dr. Mitchell introduced Marcus to a network of researchers who had been quietly studying similar phenomena for decades. This group, calling themselves the Pacific Northwest Primate Research Collective, included wildlife biologists, anthropologists, and even a few park rangers who had witnessed unexplained encounters during their careers. Marcus discovered that his experience, while extraordinary, was part of a larger pattern of interactions that suggested these creatures had been observing and occasionally making contact with humans for generations. The collective had been documenting what they called investigative encounters, incidents where the creatures seemed to be studying human behavior rather than simply avoiding contact. Marcus's tent investigation fit perfectly into this category, along with dozens of other reports from campers, hikers, and hunters who had experienced similar curious but non-threatening interactions. One particularly intriguing case involved a family camping near Mount Rainier, whose tent had been gently explored in almost exactly the same manner as Marcus's experience. The father, a geology professor, had remained silent about the encounter for over a decade before connecting with the research collective. His detailed notes and sketches from the incident showed remarkable similarities to Marcus's account, including the same pattern of circling behavior and gentle tactile investigation. As Marcus delved deeper into the research, he began to understand that his encounter might represent something more significant than a simple wildlife sighting. The evidence suggested that these creatures possessed not only intelligence, but also a sophisticated understanding of human behavior and technology. The fact that they could approach campsites undetected, investigate human artifacts without causing damage, and retreat without leaving obvious traces indicated a level of strategic thinking that challenged conventional assumptions about unknown primates. The psychological impact of this realization was profound. Marcus found himself questioning fundamental assumptions about intelligence, consciousness, and humanity's place in the natural world. His work in artificial intelligence took on new meaning as he considered the possibility that genuine non-human intelligence might already exist in the forests he loved to explore. His camping trips became more purposeful and scientific. Marcus began carrying additional equipment, motion-activated cameras, audio recording devices, and even environmental sensors that could detect changes in electromagnetic fields or infrasound that might indicate the presence of large animals. He developed protocols for documenting any unusual findings and shared his methods with other researchers in the collective. The scientific approach yielded surprising results. Over the course of 18 months following his original encounter, Marcus collected dozens of anomalous recordings, photographs, and environmental readings from various camping locations throughout the North Cascades. While none provided the definitive proof that would convince mainstream science, the accumulated evidence painted a picture of ongoing activity in areas where these creatures had been reported. Most intriguing were the audio recordings. Marcus's sensitive equipment captured vocalizations that didn't match any known wildlife in the region, complex calls that seemed to carry information across long distances. Analysis by acoustic experts revealed harmonic structures and frequency patterns that suggested intentional communication rather than random animal sounds. The research also revealed disturbing patterns in official incident reports. Park Service records, when examined carefully, showed clusters of unusual wildlife encounters, and unexplained disturbances in areas where the collective had documented creature activity. Most of these reports had been filed away without investigation, dismissed as misidentifications or hoaxes by officials who lacked the context to understand their significance. Marcus's technical background proved invaluable in analyzing this data. He developed algorithms to identify patterns in sighting reports, correlating them with environmental factors like weather, moon phases, and seasonal changes. The results suggested that these encounters followed predictable patterns, occurring most frequently during specific times of year and under particular atmospheric conditions. The work began to consume more of Marcus's time and energy. He took extended leave from his job to focus on the research, using his savings to fund equipment purchases and travel to remote locations. His friends and family worried about his obsession, but Marcus felt driven by a sense of purpose he had never experienced in his corporate career. The breakthrough came during a solo camping trip to a remote valley in the North Cascades, nearly 2 years after his original encounter. Marcus had been monitoring the area for months, documenting unusual activity, and gradually building what he believed was a comprehensive picture of creature movement patterns in the region. On the second night of his trip, Marcus was awakened by familiar sounds, the same careful footsteps he remembered from his first encounter. This time, however, he was prepared. His cameras were positioned strategically around his campsite, and he had practiced remaining motionless during simulated encounters. The creature that approached his tent that night seemed different from his first visitor. Smaller, perhaps younger, but displaying the same curious behavior. Marcus lay perfectly still as it circled his campsite, occasionally pausing to investigate his equipment. The motion-activated cameras captured remarkable footage of a bipedal figure moving with fluid grace through the forest, its proportions clearly non-human, but its behavior unmistakably intelligent. The encounter lasted nearly an hour, during which Marcus experienced the same mixture of terror and wonder that had defined his first experience. When the creature finally departed, it left behind clear evidence of its visit: footprints, disturbed vegetation, and most remarkably, what appeared to be a deliberate arrangement of stones near Marcus's tent. The stone arrangement was unlike anything Marcus had seen before. 7 rocks of varying sizes had been placed in a precise pattern that seemed too intentional to be coincidental. Dr. Mitchell and other researchers were fascinated by this development, as it suggested not only intelligence, but also a desire to communicate or leave some kind of message. Analysis of the footage from that night provided the clearest images of these creatures ever captured. The video showed anatomical details that confirmed their primate nature while highlighting features that didn't match any known species. Most significantly, the creature's behavior demonstrated problem-solving abilities and environmental awareness that indicated a level of intelligence comparable to early hominids. Marcus's second encounter marked a turning point in the research collective's work. The quality of evidence he had gathered, combined with similar findings from other researchers, began to attract attention from mainstream scientists who had previously dismissed Bigfoot research as pseudoscience. A small but growing number of primatologists, anthropologists, and wildlife biologists began to acknowledge that the accumulated evidence deserved serious scientific investigation. The implications of this shift were profound. If these creatures were real, they represented either an unknown species of primate or possibly a surviving population of archaic hominids that had adapted to life in North America's most remote wilderness areas. Either possibility would revolutionize our understanding of primate evolution and human prehistory. Marcus's journey from skeptical camper to dedicated researcher illustrates how a single extraordinary experience can reshape an entire life. His encounters have contributed to a growing body of evidence that suggests the wilderness of the Pacific Northwest harbors secrets that challenge our most basic assumptions about the natural world. The creatures that visited Marcus's tent remain as mysterious as ever, but their brief interactions with one curious human have opened new avenues of scientific inquiry and reminded us that even in our age of satellite imagery and GPS tracking, the wild places of our world still hold wonders that await discovery.